Okay, we've been learning how to use layer styles to modify our type. And it's done a lot, right? I've been able to match the inside of these letters with my spot illustration. What still needs to match is the stroke on the outside. So if I do that stroke, the white stroke, to my black line art, or my black lettering, let's make it white. All in layer styles. And I make it pretty big on the outside. You can see how it's also going on the inside, right? Because it's just going around whatever pixels I have. But I'm going to make it the size I want, so about there. And then I'm simply going to move that layer behind the inside coloring. And now I have lettering that matches for I voted. So that's good. That's done. Now the not my fault. How do I want to play with that? Let's see. It is all right here. So I can add a stroke to that if I want. I think that's going to be overkill. So let's look at some of these stroke options. Now, that's actually not bad. What I like about the white stroke, especially when you break the borders, is that it kind of brings the eye in naturally into the space. But I might shrink it a little bit. What's great about layer styles is you have such tight control. So I can also put it to the center and split the difference. So it actually will go inside my type a little bit. And you see how that looks a little bit cleaner than only on the outside. I can even go all the way to the inside. So this is why the strokes are better in Photopea or Photoshop than they are in Illustrator, because you have more variety of use. And because they're on a vector layer, they're always going to be perfectly clean at any size. So I like the center for my solution because it looks all tight. It looks a little chaotic. Maybe I'll make it just a tiny bit thicker. And you can always type in values too, because it can be a little glitchy to wait. So I'm going to try 52. Okay, what else can I do? I'll let that process. I'll save it, Command S. Well, I have a gradient here. Maybe I want some form of gradient here, but maybe that feels a little angrier or different. So I can add that in the same place, gradient overlay. In order for it to show, I need to take down the opacity of my color overlay. Right. So now my gradient overlay, it remembers what I did for my other letters, but I'm going to change it. And let's go to the, let's see, how many types do they have? You can always go back in your history. So these are their basic types. This is the gradient screen.
Not that the thing randomly crashed and I lost it.
No. So I can use this one, for instance, for a gradient, and then I can play with it as maybe just a texture. So instead of it being on normal mode, I kind of like that coloring actually. I can set it to dissolve. And have that kind of texture behind it, and then I can put the color overlay on top of it. And set the color overlay to dissolve. There we go. Oh, liked it before. Take this down a little bit. So these are the kind of options we can play with, which can be really effective. because I want this to feel kind of angry. This is my pessimistic one. There we go. Now, I have the white stroke as an offset, but before I do more, I probably want to pick my background. So I like the color, but if it works on gray, I want to find a better background for it. And there's lots of ways I can mess with that. I can go right to my background layer, duplicate it, and then try layer styles on that. Maybe fill that background with a gradient. I'll use one of their defaults. Let's just do this one, and then I'm going to replace those colors. And I want to do kind of a purple to blue. But maybe not that intense a blue. There we go. So that's one way. This is a colored background, but you can see it also has some texture in it because I have it set to dissolve at only 81%. So that's an easy way to get a little bit of texture. I require you to have both color and texture in your background. And then you're going to leave a white border. So that works. That's a fine poster, but I can also do more with the background if I want. For instance, I can go to Pixabay. I'm going to save my work here. Open up Pixabay and look for, let's see, poster background. There's going to be a lot, just like for scrapbooks, right? But the problem is these are all filled with things, and maybe some of them are interesting. Like this is pretty interesting, and I can use that. This is all Pixabay. It's all Creative Commons open. This is kind of interesting. But what if I want something a little bit more in the history of print? Because they have a lot of like scrapbook kind of backgrounds. So what if I look up halftone background? We talked about halftoning. And this will give me some interesting textures, right? And ways to work. I don't want it to be too busy. I like this one. And there are 4,065 pages of halftone backgrounds. So these are just the most recent. You can do clouds. Any kind of combination of color and texture, and you can composite it. Whatever floats your boat, your desires. Ooh, I like this. So once you find something or several things, you download it, the largest resolution you're able to. If you sign in, I'm signed in right now, I can download the highest amount. Otherwise, you can just do the second to the highest. But I might download a few. They all go to downloads. This is a watercolor background. Remember, these are all on Pixabay. They're all high quality, high-sized. The vectors you can use are SVGs. So like this vector graphic I could use. These are all just huge. I think this one's actually really interesting. Oh, and this is a vector graphic. That could be fun. All right, so now when I go back to Photopea, I'm going to close all of those just because it takes a lot of processing. When I'm back in Photopea, I can grab those from my downloads. And let's just try this halftone one. First of all, this SVG file. So I bring it in, and then I size it. If I hold down Shift, I can reshape it. Line it up with my border edges. if I have guides for them, that can really help. I should probably turn those on. And this is a way to add texture. And because this is an SVG file, a vector, it's going to be perfectly clean no matter how big I make it or how much I distort it in stretching it. So I want to get right on that edge. Right on this edge. Okay. So those are just black dots. I can just leave it as black dots. What I'm going to do is use that gray and put guides around it with my move tool. It will stick to it, so I can always line up these different backgrounds with the background and the border I had already selected. And I'm actually thinking I want to stretch those a little bit. Option Command T. So I'm going to free transform both the gray block behind. Whoops, I got to hold down Shift. Come on. There we go. So Option Command T, multiple layers, hold down Option and Shift, and I can stretch it out to the sides a little bit more. Just so the border is a little bit more even on each side. I think that's worth it. All right, now, what else could I do with this black vector? Well, I don't need to leave it black. I can fill it with layer styles. Same way, I can fill it with a color. And that can be pretty effective. And I can even set that to dissolve. So it blends in a little bit. So I have that nice little drop pattern behind. You can see how that's pretty effective. Not as distracting. But I need to make sure it all lines up. And so once you decide where your background is, I definitely recommend putting guides there so that you can make everything match. Okay, but what about that papery one? Just making sure the guides are sticking. Good. So now I'm going to bring in this other background. Thought this one was pretty cool. And I'm going to move it up above, just so I can see it, above the halftone. And then I'm going to Option Command T, hold down Shift and Option, so I can center it and make it fit the guides. First on the top, then on the bottom. There you go. So that looks nice and grungy, right? So how can I kind of work with both of them? Well, I could just play with opacity, kind of have them fade into each other, or I can play with blending modes and try like soft light or pin light or overlay. You see how it's giving me kind of that grunge to it. Yeah, I like the pin light. Okay, I can also make a duplicate of it, set that on dissolve, and take its opacity down.